This is the ultimate teaching of individuation, that you came into this world not to be half of something else, but to be the fullness of yourself. The sacred distance that others impose is not exile, but homecoming, the return to the self that was always there, waiting patiently beneath all the masks and adaptations, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be lived, waiting to express its unique and irreplaceable gift to the world. In embracing this distance not as abandonment, but as initiation, you transform from someone who needs to be chosen into someone who has chosen themselves so completely that they become a gift to everyone they encounter, regardless of whether that gift is recognized or received. At the end of this long journey through the labyrinth of the heart, through the shadow valleys of rejection and the mountain peaks of self-discovery, you arrive at a place that can only be called sacred. Here, in this rarefied atmosphere of the soul, you have become something that the world desperately needs but rarely sees: the lover who loves without need. This is not the love that grasps and clings, that demands and possesses, that measures its worth by what it receives in return. This is love as pure expression, love as gift without expectation, love as the natural overflow of a heart that has learned to fill itself from the infinite wellspring within. You have traveled far from the person who once stood at the beginning of this path, wounded by another's inability to receive what you offered, crushed by their distance, interpreting their limitations as evidence of your own inadequacy. That person, so beautiful in their vulnerability, so touching in their need to be chosen, was not wrong to love deeply. But they loved from a place of incompleteness, offering their heart as a bargain, an exchange, a transaction that required reciprocation to feel successful. They loved in order to be loved, gave in order to receive, opened in order to be filled by another's presence. Now, after walking through the fire of individuation, after learning to hold the tension of opposites without collapsing, after discovering the hermit's gift of sacred solitude and the alchemical transformation of turning lead into gold, you have become something entirely different. You have become the embodiment of what Jung called the self, not the small self that needs constant validation, but the self that is connected to the source of all being, that draws its strength from the eternal rather than the temporal, that loves because love is its nature, not because love is its need. This transformation is perhaps the most profound that a human being can undergo, for it represents the shift from ego consciousness to self-consciousness, from personal love to transpersonal love, from conditional giving to unconditional being. The lover who loves without need is no longer seeking to fill an emptiness, but expressing a fullness. They are no longer trying to complete themselves through another, but offering their own completeness as a gift to the world. This is the love that the mystics speak of, the love that transforms everything it touches because it asks for nothing in return. When you love without need, you are no longer wounded by others' inability to receive what you offer. Their distance becomes as natural as the space between stars, necessary, beautiful, part of the cosmic dance, rather than evidence of cosmic cruelty. You understand that their limitations are not about you, but about their own journey, their own capacity, their own timing. You can hold space for their growth without needing them to grow. You can offer your presence without requiring their acceptance. You can love them fully, while allowing them complete freedom to respond or not respond according to their own inner wisdom. This is the paradox that only the mature soul can embrace. The more completely you love without need, the more attractive you become to those who are capable of real love. But by the time you reach this level of spiritual development, whether or not anyone is attracted to you has ceased to matter in the old way. You have found the source of love within yourself, and from this source flows an endless stream of affection for all of life. You love the sunrise because it is beautiful, not because it validates your capacity for beauty. You love music because it moves your soul, not because it proves your soul can be moved. You love other people because love is what you are, not because love is what you need. The lover who loves without need has learned the secret that the ego never discovers, that you already are what you were seeking. All the love you thought you needed from others was already present within you, waiting to be recognized and expressed. All the validation you sought from external sources was already available from the self that connects you to the divine source of all being. All the completion you hoped another person could provide was already yours the moment you stopped abandoning yourself in pursuit of others' acceptance. This realization brings with it a quality of presence that is unmistakable. When you are no longer seeking anything from others, you can be fully present to what they are actually offering. When you are no longer trying to get them to love you, you can actually see them as they are, rather than as projections of your own needs. When you are no longer afraid of their distance, you can appreciate their closeness without clinging to it. This quality of presence is magnetic, not because it tries to attract, but because it embodies the very thing that every soul is seeking: the experience of being met without being needed, loved without being possessed, seen without being judged. The transformation into the lover who loves without need also brings with it a profound freedom. You are free to express your authentic feelings without being attached to how others respond to them. You are free to offer your gifts without being diminished when they are not received. You are free to be vulnerable without being dependent on others' care for your wounds. You are free to love deeply without losing yourself in the beloved. This freedom is not the freedom of the ego that protects itself through detachment, but the freedom of the self that is so secure in its own being that it can afford to be completely open. In this state, you discover that love is not something you do, but something you are. It is not an action, but an emanation, not a strategy, but a spontaneous expression of your true nature. When you love without need, you are not trying to create a particular outcome, but simply being who you are. This kind of love has the power to heal not only your own wounded heart, but the hearts of everyone you encounter, for it reminds them of their own capacity for love without need, their own potential for wholeness, their own connection to the source of all being. The lover who loves without need has also learned to love the very distance that once caused such pain. You understand now that others' inability to receive your love fully is not a rejection of your worth, but a reflection of their own journey toward wholeness. You can appreciate the sacred work they are doing even when it requires them to turn away from what you offer. You can honor their need for space, their timing, their process, without taking it personally. This is perhaps the highest form of love. Loving someone enough to let them be exactly where they are, even when where they are is far from you. This does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. The lover who loves without need is not detached, but rather attached to love itself, rather than to any particular person or outcome. They may feel sadness when others cannot receive their gifts, but it is the sadness of compassion rather than the sadness of rejection. They may feel longing for deeper connection, but it is the longing of the infinite expressing itself through the finite, rather than the longing of incompleteness seeking completion. The journey to becoming the lover who loves without need has taught you that the answer you were seeking was never outside yourself. Every person you loved who could not love you back was serving as a mirror, reflecting back to you the places where you had not yet learned to love yourself. Every rejection was an invitation to discover your own capacity for self-acceptance. Every distance imposed by others became an opportunity to close the distance between your ego and yourself. Now, standing in the fullness of your own being, you realize that you have become the answer to your own deepest prayers. You are no longer waiting for someone else to see your worth because you see it clearly yourself. You are no longer hoping for someone else to choose you because you have chosen yourself so completely that you have become unchosenable. Not because you are unlovable, but because you are so full of your own love that you cannot be diminished by others' inability to recognize it. This is the final teaching of the heart's journey, that love is not a hunger to be fed, but a flame to be tended. When you tend your own flame with care and attention, when you keep it burning bright, regardless of whether others gather around its warmth, you discover that you are not just loving, but are love itself expressing through human form. You are not just seeking the beloved, but are the beloved recognizing itself in every face, every sunset, every moment of beauty that graces your existence. This is perhaps the most difficult teaching to embrace, for every fiber of your human conditioning screams against it. From birth, you have been taught that love means being chosen, that worth means being wanted, that success means being seen and celebrated by others. The ego builds its entire identity around these external confirmations, creating a house of cards that collapses the moment others withdraw their approval. But individuation asks something entirely different of you: to build your identity from the inside out, to find your center in your own depths rather than in others' opinions, to become so grounded in your authentic self that others' choices about you become as irrelevant as the weather on a distant planet. When someone cannot handle your intensity, when they flee from the depth you offer, when they choose surface over substance, safety over growth, familiar dysfunction over transformative love, they are revealing something essential about their own journey, not yours. They are showing you the limits of their current capacity, the boundaries of their present courage, the walls their own wounds have built around their heart. This information is useful, even compassionate, but it is not a reflection of your value or a reason to diminish the fire that burns within you. The sacred distance becomes a crucible in which everything that is not truly you is burned away. The heat of rejection, the false self that was designed to please others, begins to crumble. The persona that was carefully crafted to win approval starts to dissolve. The masks that were worn to hide your true nature fall away like autumn leaves, leaving you standing naked before the mirror of your own soul. This stripping away is not destruction, but revelation, the uncovering of the diamond that was always there beneath the layers of social conditioning and adaptive strategies. Jung understood that the self, that deep center of authentic being, cannot be found in relationship to others, but only in relationship to itself. The self does not need to be validated by external sources because it is the source of its own validation. It does not need to be chosen because it has already chosen itself. It does not need to be understood because it understands itself. The self is the part of you that remains constant while everything else changes, the part that knows its own worth regardless of others' recognition or rejection of that worth. This is why the spiritual traditions speak of the pathless path, the journey that leads away from the crowd and into the wilderness of one's own being. The mystics and sages, the artists and visionaries, all those who have contributed something unique to the world, have walked this lonely road of individuation. They have learned to draw their strength from their own well, to find their direction, from their own inner compass, to trust their own vision even when no one else can see what they see. In the sacred distance, you discover that your greatest gifts are often too intense for most people to receive. Your capacity for depth makes others uncomfortable with their own shallowness. Your willingness to feel fully makes others defensive about their emotional numbness. Your commitment to truth makes others squirm in their comfortable lies. Your authentic presence reminds others of how much of themselves they have abandoned in service of fitting in. This is not your problem to solve, but your destiny to embrace. The avoidance you experience is not random, but archetypal. You carry something that threatens the status quo, something that challenges people to grow beyond their current limitations. Like the fool in the tarot, you bring a disruptive innocence that exposes the games everyone else is playing. Like the hermit, you carry a light that reveals shadows others prefer to keep hidden. Like the magician, you demonstrate possibilities that make others' compromises look like the betrayals they are. This is sacred work, even when, especially when, it is not appreciated or understood. The fire that shapes you in this sacred distance is not the fire of punishment, but the fire of purification. Every rejection burns away another layer of false identity. Every misunderstanding dissolves another illusion about who you thought you needed to be. Every moment of standing alone strengthens your capacity to stand in your truth, regardless of who is standing with you. You are being forged into someone who can love without attachment, give without expectation, and remain open without being dependent on others' receptivity. This process of individuation through sacred distance teaches you the difference between loneliness and solitude, between abandonment and independence, between being rejected and being liberated. The ego experiences distance as abandonment and reacts with desperation, clinging, and self-doubt. But the self experiences distance as freedom, freedom to be authentic without performance, to love without manipulation, to exist without justification. In the mythology of transformation, the hero must always face the dragon alone. This is not cruelty but necessity. Certain battles can only be fought in solitude. Certain treasures can only be claimed by those who have learned to value their own company above others' approval. The sacred distance is your dragon, and your treasure is the unshakable knowledge of who you are when no one is watching, what you value when no one is validating, what you love when no one is reciprocating. The initiation that occurs in this space is profound and irreversible. You learn to source your joy from your own connection to life rather than from others' acknowledgement of that connection. You learn to find meaning in your own experience rather than in others' interpretation of that experience. You learn to trust your own perceptions rather than deferring to others' versions of reality. This is not narcissism, but its opposite. The healthy self-love that makes genuine love of others possible. Those who cannot handle your intensity are often trapped in their own fear of intensity. They have learned to live at a safe distance from their own depths, to maintain careful control over their emotional life, to choose predictability over possibility. Your presence reminds them of everything they have given up in exchange for safety, and this reminder is too painful to bear. Their avoidance is not about you, but about their own relationship with the unlived life within them. Understanding this transforms your entire relationship with rejection. You begin to see that those who turn away are often those who most need what you offer, but are least equipped to receive it. Your gift becomes like medicine that tastes bitter to those who have been feeding on poison for so long that health feels foreign. This understanding brings not bitterness, but compassion, for them and for yourself. You are not here to force medicine down unwilling throats, but to become so healthy yourself that your very presence offers healing to those who are ready to receive it. The sacred distance also teaches you about divine timing. Just as a flower does not bloom to impress the gardener, but because blooming is its nature, you learn to express your authentic self not to win approval, but because authenticity is your nature. Whether others appreciate the beauty of your blooming becomes as irrelevant as whether they appreciate a sunset or a symphony. Beauty exists for its own sake, truth stands on its own merit, and love flows for its own fulfillment. In this understanding, you discover the difference between personal love and impersonal love. Personal love needs to be returned, validated and reciprocated. It creates bonds of attachment and dependence. But impersonal love, the love that flows from the self rather than from the ego, needs nothing in return because it is already complete. It loves the beloved not because of what they provide, but because love is its own reward. This love can withstand any distance, survive any rejection, transcend any misunderstanding because it is not dependent on external conditions for its existence. The paradox of individuation is that by learning to need no one, you become someone worth knowing. By learning to stand alone, you become someone worth standing with. By learning to love yourself completely, you become someone capable of loving others unconditionally. The sacred distance that seemed like punishment reveals itself as preparation for a kind of relationship that most people can only dream of. Relationship between two whole beings who choose each other not from need, but from freedom, not from incompleteness, but from overflow. This is the deeper meaning of the sacred distance. It is not keeping you from love, but preparing you for love that is worthy of who you are becoming. The love that requires you to diminish yourself, to hide your light, to apologize for your intensity, is not love at all, but fear wearing love's mask. The love that is meant for you will recognize your intensity as sacred fire, your depth as holy, water, your authenticity as precious gold. This love will not turn away from your brightness, but will add its own light to yours, creating an illumination that serves not just the two of you, but the entire world, until such love appears. Or even, if it never appears in the form you expected, you have the love affair that matters most, the love affair with your own becoming. In the sacred distance, you discover that you are both the lover and the beloved, both the seeker and the sought, both the question and the answer. You are complete unto yourself while remaining open to whatever gifts relationship might bring. You are whole while remaining available for wholeness with another. You are individual while remaining connected to the universal. This regret is not mere nostalgia, but the soul's way of processing what was lost when the ego made its desperate choice for self-preservation over vulnerability, for the known over the unknown, for the safe shore over the open sea. Sometimes the return comes as a moment of sudden awakening, a flash of recognition that cuts through years of self-deception like lightning illuminating a landscape they had forgotten existed. They may be living their carefully constructed life, surrounded by all the things that were supposed to make them happy, when suddenly they understand with crystalline clarity that they are living a lie. The persona they have crafted, the relationships they have settled for, the dreams they have abandoned, all of it crumbles in the face of this recognition, leaving them standing naked before the truth they spent so long avoiding. But here is the crucial understanding, their awakening, their regret, their dreams of return. None of this is yours to wait for or depend upon. The ego's first impulse, when sensing this possibility, is to orient itself around reunion, to make their potential return the center of your own journey, to hold your breath and put your life on pause while you wait for them to remember what they buried. This is the greatest trap the psyche can set for you, for it keeps you bound to their timeline, their process, their healing, while your own soul withers in the waiting. Jung's deepest teaching is that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, is an inward journey that cannot be derailed by external circumstances or dependent on other people's choices. Your task is not to wait for their return, but to use this entire experience as fuel for your own transformation. Their running becomes your opportunity to learn about your own capacity for love without attachment. Their silence becomes your invitation to develop your own inner voice. Their absence becomes the space in which you can discover who you are when you are not trying to be who they need you to be. This is perhaps the most difficult teaching to embody, for the heart that loved genuinely wants nothing more than to be reunited with its beloved. The ego that was wounded wants nothing more than to be vindicated by their eventual recognition of what they lost. But these wants, however natural and understandable, keep you trapped in the past, living your life in reference to someone else's journey rather than walking your own path with full presence and commitment. The return of the repressed in their psyche is their work to do, their dragons to face, their integration to achieve. Your work is entirely different. Your work is to take everything this experience has taught you about love, loss, vulnerability, and resilience, and weave it into the fabric of your own becoming. Your work is to love so fully and freely that you transform not only yourself, but the very quality of love available in the world. Your work is to become someone who can hold the tension between attachment and freedom, between caring deeply and letting go completely. Consider the alchemical nature of this process. The medieval alchemists spoke of the opus contra naturam, the work against nature, which required the practitioner to go against every natural instinct in service of transformation. Your natural instinct is to hold on, to wait, to hope for their return. The work against nature is to let go, to move forward, to hope for your own continued evolution regardless of what they choose to do with their awakening. This does not mean becoming hard or closed or cynical about love. It means becoming so secure in your own worth, so clear about your own path, so committed to your own growth that their return becomes irrelevant to your well-being. If they come back, transformed and ready for the depth of connection that was once possible between you, you can meet them from a place of wholeness rather than need. If they never return, if they spend their entire lives running from the truth that pursues them in dreams and synchronicities, you remain undiminished, complete, living your life with the full intensity it deserves. The return of the repressed is ultimately about the psyche's inexorable movement toward truth and wholeness. What they buried will surface because it must, not because the universe is romantic or because love always wins, but because the human psyche cannot sustain splits indefinitely without creating symptoms. Their repressed love will return as their anxiety, their depression, their vague sense of dissatisfaction with the life they built on the foundation of that initial betrayal of their own heart. It will return as their difficulty trusting their own feelings, their pattern of running from intimacy, their sense that something essential is missing from their existence. But this return serves their individuation process, not yours. Your individuation requires something entirely different: the capacity to love without attachment to outcomes, to give without expectation of return, to remain open without being dependent on any particular person's response to your openness. This is the love that the mystics speak of, the love that transforms everything it touches because it asks for nothing in return, the love that is complete in itself rather than seeking completion through union with another. The journey inward, that you must take, leads not back to them, but forward to yourself. It leads to the discovery of your own capacity for wholeness, your own ability to create meaning and beauty and connection, regardless of who chooses to accompany you on the path. It leads to the recognition that the love you felt for them was never really about them at all, but about your own capacity to love, your own ability to see the sacred in another human being, your own gift for recognizing beauty and potential wherever it appears. This recognition transforms everything. The love you thought you lost becomes the love you discovered within yourself. The connection you thought was severed becomes the connection you learned to make with life itself. The intimacy you thought required another person becomes the intimacy you cultivated with your own soul, your own dreams, your own deepest values and truths. When the repressed returns in their psyche, and it will, for the psyche cannot lie to itself forever, they may find themselves reaching out, trying to reconnect, hoping to reclaim what they threw away. But by then, if you have done your work, if you have committed to the inward journey with the same intensity you once brought to loving them, you will be someone entirely different. You will be someone who can receive their awakening with compassion, but without desperation, with openness, but without attachment, with love, but without need. This is the deeper teaching hidden within the pain of their leaving. That true love is not about finding the right person, but about becoming the right person. Someone so whole, so secure in their own being, so connected to their own source of meaning and joy, that they can love freely without being diminished by the absence of reciprocation. Someone who understands that the greatest gift they can give to any relationship is their own completeness, their own capacity for happiness, their own commitment to growth and evolution. The return of the repressed is guaranteed by the laws of the psyche. But your healing, your growth, your transformation, these depend entirely on your willingness to turn toward yourself with the same intensity of care and attention you once directed toward them. This is not selfishness, but the deepest generosity, for only someone who has learned to love themselves unconditionally can offer unconditional love to another. Only someone who has discovered their own wholeness can participate in relationship without losing themselves in the process. In the end, whether they return or not becomes a footnote to the real story, which is the story of your own becoming. The love that was buried in their psyche was never the love you needed anyway. It was partial, conditional, frightened, defended. The love you need is the love you can give yourself, the love you can offer to the world, the love that flows from your own connection to the sacred source of all being. This love requires no return of the repressed, because it is not repressed at all but flowing freely, transforming everything it touches, creating new possibilities with every breath you take. In the deepest chambers of the soul, where the ego's desperate cries for recognition cannot reach, lives a truth so fundamental that most spend their entire lives avoiding its implications. You did not come into this world to be chosen by others, but to choose yourself, again and again, until the choosing becomes as natural as breathing. Individuation, Jung's sacred term for the process of becoming who you truly are, has nothing to do with being wanted, validated, or accepted by the external world. It is the soul's relentless movement toward its own completion, a journey that often requires the very rejection and distance that the ego fears most. The sacred distance that others impose upon you is not punishment, but preparation. When they turn away, when they refuse your gifts, when they cannot bear the intensity of what you offer, they are not making a statement about your worth. They are creating the precise conditions your soul needs to remember itself. Like the oyster that transforms the irritation of sand into pearl, your psyche uses their avoidance as the raw material for something far more precious than their acceptance could ever provide: your own unshakable sense of self. The hermit's gift is the recognition that you contain multitudes, not just the social self that interacts with others, but the dreamer who visits other worlds in sleep, the thinker who grapples with the great questions, the feeler who experiences the full spectrum of human emotion, the creator who brings new things into being, the seeker who hungers for truth and meaning. In solitude, these various aspects of yourself can finally meet and converse, can negotiate their differences and discover their common ground. You become not just a person, but a universe unto yourself, rich with unexplored territories and undiscovered treasures. This inner richness transforms the very nature of your relationship with others. When you are comfortable in your own company, when you have learned to enjoy the conversation of your own thoughts and the companionship of your own dreams, you approach relationships from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. You no longer need others to complete you because you have discovered your own completeness. You no longer fear being alone because you have learned that alone is not the same as lonely. This fundamental shift changes everything about how you love, how you give, how you receive, and how you show up in the world. The archetypal hermit is often depicted as an old figure, not because chronological age is required for this initiation, but because the wisdom gained in solitude has an ancient quality to it. It is the wisdom of the mystics and sages, the poets and prophets, all those who have learned to find the sacred in the silence, the profound in the private, the universal in the utterly personal. This wisdom cannot be taught or transmitted directly. It must be discovered through the direct experience of one's own depths. In the darkness of the hermit's cave, you encounter what Jung called the collective unconscious, those deeper layers of psyche that connect you to all of humanity, to the archetypal patterns that govern human experience across cultures and centuries. Paradoxically, it is in the most private moments of solitude that you touch the most universal truths. The insights that come in these quiet spaces are not just personal revelations, but glimpses into the fundamental nature of existence itself. You discover that your individual journey is simultaneously utterly unique and completely universal, that your particular path through the darkness illuminates truths that apply to all who walk the human way. The hermit's lantern becomes a metaphor for consciousness itself, the capacity to bring light to what was hidden, understanding to what was mysterious, integration to what was fragmented. This inner light grows stronger, not through interaction with others, but through sustained attention to the movements of your own soul. You learn to read the subtle signs of your own inner weather, to track the migrations of your moods and thoughts, to recognize the patterns that govern your own psychological seasons. This intimate knowledge of your own being becomes the foundation for all authentic relationship, for you cannot truly know another until you have learned to know yourself. There is a fierce independence that develops in the hermit's cave, but it is not the brittle independence of the wounded ego that pushes others away out of fear. It is the mature independence of a soul that has learned to stand on its own feet, to trust its own perceptions, to value its own company. This independence paradoxically makes deeper intimacy possible, for you can only give to others what you possess yourself. If you have not learned to be intimate with your own soul, how can you offer genuine intimacy to another? The gifts of the hermit phase are numerous and profound. You develop what Jung called a feeling for the eternal, a sense of connection to something larger than your personal concerns and daily dramas. You discover reservoirs of creativity that were hidden beneath the noise of social interaction. You uncover sources of strength and resilience that you never knew you possessed. You develop a quality of presence that comes from having spent time in true solitude, not the restless, anxious solitude of the disconnected, but the rich, fertile solitude of the deeply connected. Perhaps most importantly, you learn to distinguish between the voice of your authentic self and the voices of internalized others, the parents, teachers, peers, and cultural messages that have been speaking through you for years. In the quiet of solitude, these borrowed voices begin to fade, and your own voice, perhaps tentative at first, begins to emerge. This is the voice that knows what you truly value, what you genuinely desire, what you are actually called to do with your life. It is the voice that has been waiting patiently beneath all the other voices for the moment when it could finally be heard. The hermit's journey is not about becoming a recluse or rejecting human connection permanently. It is about developing the capacity to be alone without being lonely, to be self-contained without being selfish, to be independent without being isolated. It's about discovering that you are complete unto yourself while remaining open to the gifts that relationship can bring. When you have learned to light your own inner fire, you can sit with others around their fires without losing your own flame. When you have learned to find the sacred in solitude, you can recognize the sacred in community. The world that seemed to ignore you, that appeared to cast you out, has actually given you the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to discover who you are when no one is watching, what you value when no one is validating, what you love when no one is reciprocating. This is the hermit's ultimate gift, the recognition that you are already whole, already valuable, already worthy of love, not because others recognize these truths, but because they are inherent in your very being. When you finally emerge from the hermit's cave, lantern in hand, you carry with you a light that cannot be extinguished by external circumstances. You have learned to be your own best friend, your own wisest counselor, your own most faithful companion. This does not make you antisocial or narcissistic, quite the opposite. It makes you someone who can offer genuine presence to others because you have learned to be genuinely present with yourself. It makes you someone who can love authentically because you have learned to love the authentic self that exists beneath all masks and pretenses. The hermit's gift is not solitude itself, but what solitude makes possible: the discovery of your own luminous nature, the recognition of your own sacred worth, the understanding that you carry within you everything you need to be fully alive, fully creative, fully loving. This is the light that no darkness can overcome, the companionship that no abandonment can destroy, the love that needs no external validation to know its own reality. In the end, the hermit teaches us that we are never truly alone, because we carry within us the light of consciousness itself, the divine spark that connects us to all that is sacred, all that is eternal, all that is ultimately real. There is a law in the depths of the psyche that Freud first named and Jung refined. What is pushed into the darkness will eventually rise to the surface, like a cork held under water that shoots up with explosive force when finally released. The love they buried, the connection they severed, the feelings they convinced themselves were illusion. All of it lives on in the underground rivers of the unconscious, gathering strength in the shadows, waiting for the moment when the defenses weaken and the repressed content can break through into consciousness like spring water bursting from stone. You may have wondered, in your moments of deepest doubt, whether what you experienced was real. Perhaps they convinced you it was fantasy, projection, wishful thinking. Perhaps you convinced yourself of the same, trying to make sense of their sudden withdrawal, their cold indifference, their ability to walk away as if nothing sacred had passed between you. But the psyche does not lie about such things. What was felt was real. What was shared was genuine. What was buried is not dead, but merely dormant, like seeds beneath winter snow that will inevitably sprout when conditions align. Jung understood that the unconscious is not merely a repository for forgotten memories, but a living, dynamic system that actively works to restore wholeness. When we split off parts of our experience, when we deny aspects of our truth, when we repress what feels too dangerous or overwhelming to face, the psyche begins its compensatory work. It speaks through dreams, through slips of the tongue, through the strange magnetism that draws us back to places and people we thought we'd left behind. It creates symptoms and synchronicities, accidents and encounters, all designed to bring the repressed material back into the light, where it can be integrated rather than feared. For the one who ran, who built walls against their own heart, who chose safety over truth, This return of the repressed comes in waves that cannot be predicted or controlled. Perhaps it arrives in dreams where they find themselves reaching for you across impossible distances, waking with tears they cannot explain, and a longing they cannot name. Perhaps it surfaces in unexpected moments, a song on the radio, a scent in the air, a phrase that echoes something you once said, and suddenly they are flooded with the memory of what they convinced themselves had never been real. The return may come through regret, that particular ache of recognizing too late what was offered and refused. They may find themselves haunted by the ghost of what could have been, tortured by the recognition that they held something precious and threw it away out of fear. Yet the gift of enantiodromia is that it ensures growth, change, movement. The soul that has become too rigid in any direction will be broken open by its opposite. The person who has over-identified with their independence will be cracked open by longing. The one who has lost themselves in relationship will be called back to their own center by the fierce pull toward autonomy. These swings, however painful, prevent spiritual stagnation. They force us to experience the full range of human possibility, to discover parts of ourselves we never knew existed. The question is not how to stop the pendulum from swinging. That would be like trying to stop the seasons from changing or the tides from turning. The question is how to swing with greater consciousness, how to honor both poles without being possessed by either. Jung called this holding the tension of the opposites. It is the capacity to feel both the pull toward connection and the pull toward independence, without having to choose one and reject the other. It is the ability to love fully while remaining whole, to open completely while maintaining boundaries, to be vulnerable without losing dignity. This holding of tension is perhaps the most difficult spiritual work a human being can undertake. It requires us to resist the mind's tendency to choose sides, to make one thing good and another bad, to create simple narratives that explain away complexity. It asks us to become comfortable with paradox, with contradiction, with the simultaneous truth of opposing realities. The person learning to hold this tension might say, "I love you and I need space. I want to be close to you and I want to be alone. I trust you and I am afraid of you. I am committed to this relationship and I am terrified of losing myself in it." These are not contradictions to be resolved, but paradoxes to be lived. The soul that can hold such tensions without needing to collapse them into simpler truths has achieved a kind of psychological sophistication that allows for real intimacy. They can be present with their partner's contradictions because they have learned to be present with their own. They can offer consistency not by eliminating their complexity, but by embracing it consciously, by becoming a safe container for their own multiplicity. In relationships, this might look like learning to communicate the swing before it happens. I am feeling very open right now, and I know that sometimes after I open this much, I need to pull back for a while. This isn't about you. It's about my own rhythm of intimacy. Or, I've been very focused on my independence lately, and I'm starting to feel the pull toward connection. I might need extra reassurance as I move through this transition. Such communication transforms enantiodromia from an unconscious compulsion into a conscious dance. The swing still happens. It must happen, for it is the nature of the psyche, but it happens with awareness, with care for the other, with recognition of the pattern, rather than blind reaction to it. The partner, too, can learn to recognize the signs, to understand that the sudden withdrawal is not rejection, but rhythm, not punishment, but process. This is the deep teaching of enantiodromia, that wholeness is not found in eliminating our contradictions, but in embracing them consciously. The person who learns to swing between closeness and distance with awareness becomes someone who can offer both intimacy and space, both passion and peace, both presence and freedom. They become a paradox walking, a living reminder that the human soul is large enough to contain multitudes, complex enough to hold opposites without breaking. The ultimate gift of working consciously with enantiodromia is that it leads us toward what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites in creative tension until something new emerges. When we no longer have to choose between connection and independence, between vulnerability and strength, between opening and closing, we discover possibilities that exist beyond either pole. We find ways of being intimate that honor autonomy, ways of being close that create space for growth, ways of loving that enhance rather than diminish our wholeness. This is the promise hidden within the maddening dance of hot and cold, push and pull, reach and retreat. Behind the seemingly chaotic swings of the pendulum lies an intelligence working toward integration, toward the marriage of opposites, toward the birth of something more complex and beautiful than either extreme could offer alone. The person who learns to dance consciously with their own enantiodromia becomes someone who can love fully while remaining whole, who can open completely while maintaining their center, who can offer their heart without losing their soul. Enantiodromia teaches us that love is not about finding someone who eliminates our contradictions, but about finding someone who can dance with them, who can hold steady while we swing, who can see the wholeness in our fragmentation and the wisdom in our wild swings between the poles of human experience. There comes a moment in the soul's journey when the world grows quiet around you, not because it has abandoned you, but because it has served its purpose and now steps back to allow something deeper to emerge. This is not the loneliness that gnaws at the edges of consciousness like hunger, but the sacred aloneness that feels like coming home to a self you had forgotten existed. In the tarot, this figure is called the hermit, the old soul who carries a lantern through the darkness, not seeking others, but illuminating the path for those who might follow. You are being called into this archetype, whether you recognize it or not. When others begin to ignore you, when invitations cease and phones grow silent, when the social fabric that once held you seems to unravel thread by thread, the ego screams abandonment. It tells stories of unworthiness, of fundamental flaws that make you unlovable, of social failures that mark you as defective. But beneath the ego's panic lies something infinitely more profound, the soul's recognition that it is time to turn inward, to discover what exists in the fertile darkness of your own being when all external validation falls away. This is the hermit's gift, the understanding that solitude is not exile but initiation. You are not being pushed away from life but drawn toward its deeper currents. The world has not forgotten you. It has created the perfect conditions for you to remember yourself. In the mythology of the soul's journey, there comes a time when the hero must leave the village, must walk alone into the wilderness, must face the dragons and demons that can only be met in solitude. This is not punishment but privilege, the sacred opportunity to discover what you are made of when stripped of all external mirrors and support systems. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires periods of withdrawal from the collective. The persona, that mask we wear in social situations, can only be examined and transformed when we step away from the audiences that keep it in place. The shadow, those rejected aspects of ourselves, can only be integrated when we have the privacy to face them without judgment or interference. The self, that deep center of authentic being, can only be heard when the noise of other voices fades to silence. In the hermit's cave, you meet the parts of yourself that have been waiting patiently for this moment of recognition. Perhaps it is the artist who was silenced by practical concerns, the mystic who was dismissed by rational minds, the child who was told to grow up too quickly. These forgotten aspects of your being have been living in exile within you waiting for the external world to quiet enough that you might hear their whispered songs. Solitude becomes the sacred space where these inner voices can finally speak without competition, where the full orchestra of your being can play without being drowned out by the demands and expectations of others. The hermit's lantern is not meant to light the way back to where you came from, but to illuminate the path deeper into the mystery of your own existence. This inner light, Jung would call it the transcendent function, begins to glow when you are no longer trying to see yourself through other people's eyes. It is the light of your own consciousness, your own wisdom, your own capacity to know what is true for you, regardless of what others think or believe. This light has always been there, but it takes the darkness of solitude to make it visible. There is a profound difference between loneliness and aloneness, though the ego often confuses them. Loneliness is the feeling of being cut off from connection, of being incomplete without others to define and validate your existence. It is a wound that seeks healing through reunion, through the restoration of social bonds and external validation. But aloneness is a fullness unto itself, a state of being so complete that it requires nothing from the outside world to justify or sustain itself. The hermit knows this difference intimately and has learned to transmute the base metal of loneliness into the gold of sacred solitude. In this alchemical transformation, you begin to discover that you are not half of a relationship seeking completion, but a whole being capable of profound intimacy with life itself. The trees become your companions, the sky your confidant, the silence your most honest conversation partner. You learn that you can be deeply moved by beauty, profoundly challenged by ideas, completely absorbed in creative work, intensely present to the moment, all without needing another person to witness or validate these experiences. This is not isolation, but integration, not withdrawal, but expansion into the vast territories of your own being. The archetypal nature of this pattern means that it transcends individual psychology and taps into collective human themes. You may find yourself playing roles that have been enacted countless times throughout human history. The muse who inspires. From a distance, the forbidden lover who embodies danger and excitement. The spiritual teacher who carries others' projections of wisdom and enlightenment. The healing figure who represents others' hopes for transformation and renewal. These archetypal roles have their own autonomous power, their own gravitational pull that can draw both individuals into unconscious participation in ancient patterns of human relationship. You may find yourself behaving like the archetype they have projected onto you, not because it represents your true nature, but because the psychological field created by their projection calls forth certain responses, certain ways of being, certain forms of expression that fit the archetypal template. Recognizing that you are caught in a web of projection and possession can be both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it means that their intense feelings may not be about you at all, but about their own psychological contents that they have unconsciously placed upon you. Liberating because it means that their inability to embrace you fully is not a reflection of your worth or lovability, but of their own internal psychological dynamics that have little to do with who you actually are. This recognition invites you to a profound form of compassion, not just for yourself, but for them as well. For projection is not a conscious choice, but an unconscious compulsion, not a deliberate manipulation, but an automatic psychological process that operates below the threshold of awareness. They are as caught in this web as you are, as unconscious of the projection as you initially were of being its recipient. The path forward requires patience, wisdom, and a commitment to your own psychological development that transcends the immediate dynamics of the relationship. You cannot force them to withdraw their projections. This is work they must do themselves, often through therapy, inner work, or the natural maturation process that comes with life experience and psychological growth. But you can work on freeing yourself from possession by their projections, on remembering who you are beneath the roles they have unconsciously assigned to you, on maintaining your authentic selfhood even while caught in the gravitational field of their unconscious psychological contents. This is sacred work, this dance with projection and possession. It is part of the great human task of developing consciousness, of learning to see ourselves and others clearly, of evolving beyond the automatic patterns that keep us trapped in unconscious relationship dynamics. Through this experience, you are being initiated into a deeper understanding of human psychology, a more profound compassion for the complexity of the human heart, and a greater capacity for authentic relationship that transcends projection and moves toward genuine mutual recognition and love. There is a law within the psyche that Jung named with an ancient Greek word, enantiodromia, the running toward the opposite. It is the invisible hand that turns love into fear, desire into revulsion, closeness into distance. Like a pendulum that swings with inevitable precision, the soul cannot sustain any extreme without eventually careening toward its polar twin. In the theater of intimate relationship, this law plays out with startling clarity, especially in those souls who flee even as they hunger, who push away even as they reach. You have witnessed it, perhaps lived it, the person who burns bright with passion one moment and turns cold as winter stone the next, the lover who speaks of forever on Tuesday and cannot bear your presence by Friday, the friend who shares their deepest wounds and then disappears for months, as if intimacy itself had become a poison they must purge from their system. This is not cruelty, though it feels like it. This is not manipulation, though it wounds like it. This is enantiodromia, the psyche's desperate attempt to maintain equilibrium by swinging wildly between the poles of experience. Jung understood that the human soul cannot exist in a state of perfect balance. We are not mechanical scales, weighing out precise portions of light and shadow. We are living systems, dynamic and reactive, always moving towards something or away from something else. The person who has invested too heavily in one extreme will find themselves, often without warning, possessed by its opposite. The one who has forced themselves into rigid closeness will suddenly crave radical independence. The one who has maintained perfect control will find themselves swept away by chaos they cannot name or tame. In the dance of intimacy, enantiodromia reveals itself as hot and cold behavior, as the maddening push-pull that leaves both participants dizzy and confused. The avoidant soul, who has spent years constructing walls of self-sufficiency, may find themselves overwhelmed by sudden waves of longing so intense they feel like drowning. In that moment, every defense feels paper-thin, every carefully maintained boundary dissolves, and they reach toward connection with the desperation of someone gasping for air. But the psyche, having swung so far toward vulnerability, cannot sustain this position. The pendulum must return, often with even greater force than before. What follows is not conscious cruelty, but unconscious correction. The soul that opened too wide, too fast, must now slam shut to protect itself from the terror of such exposure. The person who texted you at midnight, pouring out their heart in paragraphs of raw honesty, now cannot bring themselves to respond to your simple, good morning. They are not playing games. They are caught in the grip of an archetypal force that moves through them like weather, like seasons, like the tides that care nothing for human timing or desire. This is the tragedy and the gift of enantiodromia. It ensures that no human being can remain static, trapped forever in one mode of being. The person who has built their identity around being strong will eventually be brought to their knees by their own fragility. The one who has defined themselves through their need will discover, sometimes violently, their capacity for independence. The soul that has lived entirely in its head will be flooded without warning by the rising waters of feeling. The heart that has loved too freely will contract into self-protection so fierce it surprises even its owner. But why does this feel so much like betrayal when we encounter it in another? Why does the lover's sudden coldness wound us more deeply than strangers' indifference? Because we mistake the swing of the pendulum for the person themselves. We believe that the moment of openness was their real self, and the moment of withdrawal is false. Or we decide that their distance is their truth, and their vulnerability was manipulation. We try to freeze them in the moment that felt most real, to us, most aligned with our own needs and desires, and then experience their inevitable movement as abandonment. Jung would say that both states are real, the reaching and the retreating, the opening and the closing, the fire and the ice. The person caught in enantiodromia is not split between a true self and a false self. They are experiencing the full spectrum of human possibility, the entire range of what it means to be both individual and relational, both autonomous and connected. Their hot and cold behavior is not a flaw to be corrected, but a natural expression of the soul's attempt to hold all of itself, even the contradictory parts. Consider the mythology of this dance. In ancient stories, we find gods and goddesses who embody such contradictions, deities who are both nurturing and destructive, creative and consuming, loving and terrible. Kali, who dances on Shiva's chest, is both the loving mother and the fierce destroyer. She does not choose between these aspects of herself. She contains them both, moves between them as the moment requires. The Greek god Dionysus brings both ecstasy and madness, both connection and dissolution. These archetypal figures remind us that the soul's capacity to hold opposites is not a bug in the system, but a feature. Not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be honored. When we encounter someone caught in the grip of enantiodromia, we are witnessing the soul's attempt to individuate, to become whole, by experiencing the full range of its possibilities. The person who swings between desperate connection and fierce independence is not broken. They are trying to discover how to be both separate and together, how to love without losing themselves, how to open without being consumed. Their contradictory behavior is the external manifestation of an internal negotiation between parts of themselves that have never learned to coexist peacefully. The shadow side of enantiodromia is that it can become a way of avoiding true intimacy by keeping relationships in constant motion. If I am always swinging between extremes, neither I nor my partner can ever settle into the deeper work of sustained connection. The push-pull becomes a dance that prevents real meeting, real seeing, real vulnerability. The person caught in this pattern may unconsciously use the swing of the pendulum to maintain control. I will reach for you when I need to feel connected, but I will withdraw before you can really know me, before the intimacy becomes too real, too demanding. The nigredo will not last forever. The alchemists knew that after the blackening comes the albedo, the whitening, the purification, the emergence of the purified substance from the crucible of transformation. But for now, you are in the darkness. And the darkness has its own gifts to offer. Here, in the space where their voice used to live, you are learning to hear your own inner voice more clearly. Here, in the emptiness where their presence used to fill you, you are discovering the fullness of your own being. Here, in the silence where their love used to reassure you, you are finding the love that was always there, waiting in the depths of your own heart to be discovered. This is the alchemy of absence, the transformation of longing into understanding, of need into love, of separation into a deeper form of union. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. The crucible is not cruel, it is sacred, and what emerges from this darkness will be gold. Not the false gold of ego gratification, but the true gold of conscious love. The philosopher's stone that transforms everything it touches. In the strange twilight realm, between love and longing, between connection and separation, you find yourself caught in one of the most complex psychological phenomena known to the human experience. The web of projection and possession that transforms authentic relationship into a hall of mirrors where neither soul can see the other. Clearly, you have become not a person to them but a vessel, a sacred chalice into which they pour their unmet longings, their unfulfilled dreams, their unconscious fears and desires. And in this pouring, this unconscious transference of inner content onto your being, you cease to exist as yourself and become instead a living symbol of everything they cannot face within their own depths. Carl Jung understood this phenomenon with profound clarity, recognizing that much of what we call love is actually projection, the unconscious casting of our inner psychological contents onto another person, making them carry aspects of ourselves that we cannot yet acknowledge or integrate. When someone desires you deeply, yet keeps you at a distance, when they are drawn to you with magnetic intensity, yet cannot fully embrace your presence, you are witnessing the classic signs of projection in action. They are not seeing you. They are seeing a fragment of their own psyche that has been unconsciously projected onto your form. This is not personal, though it feels devastatingly so. This is archetypal, a pattern as old as consciousness itself, repeated endlessly in the theater of human relationship until the individuals involved develop enough awareness to recognize the drama they are unconsciously enacting. You have become possessed not by demonic forces as our ancestors might have imagined, but by their unlived life, their unintegrated potential, their disowned aspects of self that they cannot yet claim as their own. The archetype of projection operates through a fascinating psychological mechanism. When we encounter someone who carries qualities we long for but cannot accept in ourselves, or when we meet someone who embodies aspects of our personality that we have repressed or denied, the unconscious immediately begins its work of projection. We fall in love not with the person before us, but with the missing pieces of ourselves that we see reflected in their being. We desire them intensely because they represent our own unrealized potential, our own unlived possibilities, our own unacknowledged gifts or shadow qualities. But here lies the terrible paradox of projection. The very intensity of the attraction creates an equal and opposite force of resistance, for to truly embrace the projected person would require facing the disowned aspects of oneself that they represent. And the ego, in its desperate attempt to maintain its familiar sense of identity, cannot tolerate such confrontation with the unknown territories of the self. So they desire you and distance themselves simultaneously, drawn to you like a moth to flame, yet terrified of the transformative burning that true intimacy would require. You have become what Jung called a hook for their projections, a convenient, external form onto which they can hang their internal psychological contents without having to take responsibility for integrating them. Through their projection, they can experience their own unlived qualities vicariously, can touch their own unrealized potential through their fantasy of relationship with you, can feel connected to their own disowned aspects without having to do the difficult work of actually claiming them as part of their conscious identity. This projection may take many forms, each as complex and layered as the human psyche itself. Perhaps you represent their unlived creative potential, and they project onto you all their artistic longings that they were too afraid to pursue. Perhaps you embody the emotional depth and vulnerability they have spent their life defending against, and in their attraction to you, they touch their own capacity for feeling without having to risk opening their defended heart. Perhaps you carry the wildness and freedom they sacrificed in service of social acceptance, and through their desire for you, they can taste liberation without abandoning the safety of their constructed persona. Or perhaps the projection operates in the opposite direction. Perhaps you represent not what they long for, but what they fear most about themselves. Perhaps you embody the shadow qualities they have spent their life trying to deny or repress, and their simultaneous attraction and repulsion reflects their own ambivalent relationship with these disowned aspects of their personality. In this case, their desire for you becomes a form of shadow work by proxy, a way of dancing with their own rejected qualities without having to fully acknowledge them as part of their own psychological makeup. The phenomenon of possession works hand in hand with projection, creating a psychological field where your authentic self becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. When someone projects powerfully onto you, when they make you carry their unlived potential or unintegrated shadow, you begin to feel the psychic weight of their projections. You may find yourself behaving in ways that fulfill their unconscious expectations, playing roles that fit their projected fantasies, becoming possessed by the very qualities they have placed upon you. This possession can be intoxicating at first. There is something seductive about being seen as magical, special, extraordinary, even if that seeing is based on projection rather than genuine recognition. The intensity of their projected desire can make you feel more alive, more significant, more worthy of love than you have ever felt before. But gradually you begin to realize that you are not being loved for who you are, but for who they need you to be. You are not being desired as a complete human being, but as a symbol, a fantasy, a repository for their unlived psychological contents. The tragedy of projection is that it prevents authentic meeting between souls. As long as they see you through the lens of their own unconscious material, they cannot see you as you actually are. Your real qualities, your genuine personality, your authentic gifts and struggles become invisible to them, obscured by the projected image they have superimposed upon your being. And gradually, you too may lose sight of your own authentic self, becoming so identified with their projection that you forget who you were before you became their symbol. Jung understood that projection is not inherently negative. It is actually a necessary stage in the development of consciousness. Through projection, we make contact with disowned aspects of ourselves. We touch our own unrealized potential. We encounter the full spectrum of human possibility that exists within our own psyche. But projection becomes problematic when it remains unconscious, when the individuals involved do not recognize what is happening and therefore cannot evolve beyond it into authentic relationship. The process of withdrawing projections, what Jung called taking back projections, is one of the most challenging tasks in psychological development. It requires individuals to recognize that what they see in the other person actually belongs to their own psyche, that their intense feelings about the other are actually feelings about disowned aspects of themselves. This recognition is often accompanied by a profound sense of loss, as the projected person loses their magical, special quality and becomes simply human again. But this loss is also liberation. When they withdraw their projections from you, they reclaim their own psychological contents and begin the work of integrating them consciously. And you, freed from the burden of carrying their unlived life, can return to the sacred work of being yourself. The relationship, if it survives this process, can then evolve from projection-based fantasy to authentic human connection based on genuine seeing and mutual recognition. Until this withdrawal of projections occurs, however, you remain caught in a psychological field that is not primarily about you at all. Their desire and distance, their approach and avoidance, their intense feelings and careful boundaries, all of these reflect their internal relationship with the projected contents rather than their actual feelings about you as a person. This is why their behavior may seem so contradictory, so confusing, so impossible to understand through the lens of normal relationship dynamics. Some will eventually find the courage to risk the death that love requires. They will approach the flames of transformation and discover that what dies in the fire was never truly them, only the false self, the defended ego, the separated identity that was always an illusion. What emerges from the crucible is not less than what entered it, but infinitely more. The gold of authentic selfhood, refined by love into its purest form. Others will continue to circle at safe distances, warming themselves on the edges of your light, while avoiding the full blaze of transformation. This too is sacred, the dance of approach and retreat, desire and fear, longing and self-protection. Even those who never fully enter the fire are changed by its presence, touched by its possibility, called toward their own eventual readiness for the sacred marriage that awaits within their souls. In the depths of this profound silence, where their voice no longer reaches your ears and their presence has become a ghost that haunts the chambers of your heart, you find yourself suspended in what the ancient alchemists called the nigredo, the blackening, the first and most necessary stage of the soul's great work. This is not abandonment, though every fiber of your being screams that it is. This is not rejection, though your wounded ego interprets it as such. This is the crucible, and you are both the lead and the gold, the substance and the seeker, the one who suffers and the one who transforms. The alchemists knew what modern hearts have forgotten, that separation is not always severance, that absence is not always emptiness, that silence is not always void. They understood that before the prima materia could become the philosopher's stone, it must first be dissolved, broken down, reduced to its most essential elements in the darkness of the nigredo. You are in that darkness now, and though it feels like dying, it is actually the beginning of your becoming. Carl Jung, that great navigator of the soul's hidden territories, wrote extensively about the alchemical process as a metaphor for psychological transformation. He understood that the medieval alchemists were not merely trying to turn base metals into gold. They were describing the eternal human journey from unconsciousness to consciousness, from fragmentation to wholeness, from the false self to the authentic self. In their cryptic symbols and mysterious operations, they encoded the very process you are undergoing now, the dissolution of what you thought you were, so that what you truly are can emerge. Their absence from your life is not a punishment, it is a preparation. Not a rejection, but a reflection. The universe has not torn them away from you in cruelty. It has created the exact conditions necessary for your soul's deepest work to begin. For in the space they once occupied, in the silence where their voice once lived, in the emptiness where their love once filled you, something far more profound is happening. You are being prepared for a love that transcends dependency, for a connection that surpasses possession, for a union that begins not with another but with the depths of your own being. The nigredo is characterized by a sense of dissolution, of everything familiar falling away. You may feel that you are losing yourself, that the person you were when you were with them is dying, fragmenting, disappearing into the dark waters of separation. This is not pathology. This is process. This is not breakdown. This is breakthrough. The ego, that constructed self that defines itself through its relationships, its possessions, its roles and identities, must undergo this dissolution before the true self can emerge from the depths. Think of the caterpillar in its chrysalis, dissolved into an undifferentiated soup of cells before the butterfly can form. Think of the seed that must rot in the darkness of the earth before it can break open and reach toward the light. Think of the phoenix that must burn completely before it can rise from its own ashes. This is the mystery you are living now, though. Your conscious mind, trained to interpret absence as loss, cannot yet see the gold that is being formed in the crucible of your longing. The alchemist spoke of the solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. First, the old must be dissolved, broken, down, reduced to its essential components. Only then can the new coagulate take form, emerge in its transformed state. Your relationship with them, as you knew it, is undergoing the solve phase. Everything you thought you understood about love, about connection, about yourself in relation to another is being dissolved in the acid of separation. This is not failure. This is the necessary prelude to a love that transcends the ordinary, a connection that moves beyond the ego's demands and desires. In this space of absence, you are being asked to develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites without collapsing into one side or the other. You are learning to hold both your love for them and your love for yourself, both your desire for union and your need for individuation, both your longing for their return and your acceptance of their absence. This is not resignation. This is the development of a consciousness large enough to contain paradox, strong enough to endure uncertainty, mature enough to love without possessing. The silence between you is not empty space. It is pregnant with possibility. It is the pause between the notes that gives music its meaning, the darkness between the stars that makes their light visible, the space between the words that allows poetry to breathe. In this silence, something is gestating. Something is being born. The old relationship, built on need and projection, on the ego's hunger for completion through another, is dissolving. In its place, something infinitely more precious is forming, the capacity to love from wholeness rather than from lack, to connect from strength rather than from weakness, to unite from choice rather than from compulsion. You may resist this process, as all of us do when we are in the nigredo. The ego does not willingly surrender its illusions, does not easily release its attachments, does not gladly embrace the unknown. It will tell you that their absence means you are unloved, that their distance means you are unwanted, that their silence means you are forgotten. These are the voices of the old paradigm, the consciousness that must die before the new can be born. Listen to them with compassion, for they are the voices of a frightened child who has not yet learned that love is not possession, that connection is not control, that union is not merger. The nigredo often brings with it what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a period of profound spiritual and psychological darkness, where all the old certainties fall away and nothing new has yet emerged to take their place. You may feel suspended between worlds, caught between what was and what might be, living in a liminal space where the ordinary rules of relationship no longer apply. This is sacred territory, though it feels like exile. This is holy ground, though it feels like wasteland. In the alchemical tradition, the nigredo was often symbolized by the image of the king and queen drowning in the mercurial waters, there, old forms dissolving so that they could be reborn in higher union. You and they are undergoing this symbolic death, this necessary dissolution. The relationship you had, built on the ego's needs and projections, is drowning in the waters of separation. But this death is not final. It is transformative. From these same waters, a new form of love will emerge, purified of possession, freed from the desperate hunger that characterizes so much of human relationship. The absence you are experiencing is teaching you something crucial about the nature of love itself. True love, the alchemist knew, is not dependent on proximity. It is not diminished by distance. It does not require constant reassurance or continuous contact to maintain its essence. True love is a quality of being, not a transaction between persons. It is a state of consciousness, not a contract of mutual need fulfillment. It exists in the space between souls, in the invisible threads that connect heart to heart across any distance, in the recognition that what is truly valuable in another exists eternally and cannot be touched by the temporary conditions of physical or emotional separation. This is why the mystics spoke of love as a form of knowledge, a way of knowing that transcends the ordinary senses. You can know them completely in their absence, can feel their essence more clearly when you are not distracted by the surface drama of daily interaction. In the silence, you're learning to distinguish between loving them and needing them, between cherishing their being and clinging to their presence, between honoring what they mean to you and demanding that they fulfill your expectations. The crucible of absence is refining your capacity for unconditional love. Love that asks nothing, demands nothing, expects nothing, yet gives everything. This is not the love of the ego, which always seeks return on its investment. This is the love of the self, which loves for the sake of loving, which finds its fulfillment not in being loved back, but in the very act of loving itself. Such love is transformative, not just for the one who loves, but for the entire field of consciousness in which both souls exist. You are being prepared through this alchemical process of separation and purification to love in a way that liberates rather than binds, that elevates rather than diminishes, that expands rather than contracts. This is love as spiritual discipline, love as conscious practice, love as the royal road to the development of consciousness itself. The absence that feels like punishment is actually the universe's greatest gift to your soul's evolution. Jung recognized that this alchemical marriage was not merely a chemical process, but a profound psychological reality. The inner union of masculine and feminine principles, conscious and unconscious forces, solar and lunar energies that must come together within the individual soul for true wholeness to emerge. He called this the sacred marriage of the psyche, the moment when all the divided aspects of the self recognize their essential unity and choose integration over separation. But there is another form of conjunctio, equally sacred and even more terrifying, the alchemical marriage that occurs when two souls meet in authentic recognition, when the barriers between self and other begin to dissolve, when love becomes not just an emotion, but a transformative fire that threatens to burn away everything false in its path. You have witnessed this terror countless times, though you may not have recognized it for what it is. You see it in the eyes of those who are drawn to you, yet cannot fully approach, who desire you yet maintain careful distance, who seem to recognize something in you that both calls to them and frightens them beyond words. They hover at the edge of connection like moths circling a flame, knowing that to come closer would mean transformation, possibly destruction, certainly the end of life as they have known it. This is not the fear of ordinary rejection or casual disappointment. This is the primal terror of the ego confronting its own annihilation, the false self-sensing that genuine love would require its death. For love, real love, is indeed an alchemical fire. It burns away pretense, dissolves masks, melts the careful boundaries we have constructed to keep ourselves safe from the vulnerability of true intimacy. When someone looks at you and sees not just another person, but a doorway into the depths of their own soul, when your presence seems to activate something ancient and powerful within them, when they sense that loving you would change them at the very core of their being, this is when the fear of the inner marriage begins to manifest. The ego has spent years, perhaps decades, constructing an identity based on control, on maintaining the illusion of separateness, on managing the flow of life so that nothing too overwhelming can penetrate its carefully maintained defenses. Love threatens all of this. Love asks for surrender when the ego demands control, requests vulnerability when the ego insists on protection, calls for dissolution when the ego clings to its defined boundaries. They recognize in you what the mystics have always known, that love is not a feeling to be experienced, but a crucible to be entered, not a comfort to be enjoyed, but a death to be died. The conjunctio requires that each partner bring their whole self to the union, including all the parts they would rather hide, all the shadows they have learned to keep in darkness, all the wounds they have worked so hard to heal or conceal. 2. Love you fully would mean revealing themselves completely, and most people are not prepared for such radical nakedness of soul. They have spent so much energy creating an acceptable version of themselves, a persona that can navigate the world without too much friction, that the thought of letting you see beneath this mask feels like psychological suicide. The fear is not irrational. True love does require a kind of death, the death of the separate self, the isolated ego, the defended heart. In the alchemical marriage, two distinct substances must die to their original forms in order to be born as something entirely new. The gold that emerges from the crucible is no longer lead, no longer mercury, but a third thing that could not exist without the dissolution of what came before. When they look at you and sense this transformative potential, when they feel the stirring of love not as sweet sentiment but as sacred fire, their self-preservation instincts activate with primitive intensity. Every cell in their being begins to scream warnings. Danger, transformation ahead. Your carefully constructed life is at risk. So they retreat, not because they don't love you, but because they love you too much to risk it. They turn away, not because they don't see your beauty, but because they see it too clearly and know that fully receiving it would shatter their carefully maintained composure. They ignore you, not because you mean nothing to them, but because you mean everything, and they are not yet ready for everything. This creates the peculiar dynamic you have experienced, the push and pull of desire and terror, attraction and avoidance, longing and retreat. They are caught between two powerful forces, the soul's desire for union and the ego's need for survival. The soul recognizes in you the missing piece of itself, the other half it has been seeking, the mirror in which it can finally see its own completeness. But the ego sees in you a threat to everything it has worked to establish and maintain. The inner marriage cannot be forced. Like the alchemical process it mirrors, it requires not just the right elements, but the right conditions. The proper temperature, the correct pressure, the precise timing that allows transformation to occur naturally. Most importantly, it requires the willingness of both partners to risk everything they think they are for the sake of who they might become together. Many people are simply not ready for such risk. They have too much invested in their current identity, too much fear of the unknown, too little trust in the transformative process to willingly enter the crucible of true intimacy. They prefer the safety of separation to the danger of union, the known quantities of their separate lives to the mysterious possibilities that love might create. Others are at different stages of their own inner development. They may still be working on the preliminary alchemical processes within themselves, dissolving old patterns, integrating shadow material, learning to love themselves before they can truly love another. The conjunctio with another person cannot occur until the individual has made significant progress on their own inner marriage, their own integration of opposing forces within the psyche. Jung understood that the capacity for true intimacy emerges from psychological wholeness, not from emptiness seeking to be filled. Those who approach love from a place of incompleteness often create relationships based on mutual dependency rather than mutual wholeness, projection rather than recognition, need rather than choice. When someone is not yet whole within themselves, your wholeness becomes both attractive and threatening. They are drawn to the integration you embody, but terrified by the work it would require of them. They want the gold of transformation, but are not prepared for the fire that creates it. The fear of the inner marriage also carries within it the fear of losing oneself completely. Many people have confused love with absorption, intimacy with merger, connection with the loss of individual identity. They fear that to love you fully would mean disappearing entirely, becoming nothing more than half of a couple, losing touch with their own dreams, desires, and direction. But the true conjunctio is not about losing oneself. It is about finding oneself more completely than ever before. In the sacred marriage of souls, each partner becomes more themselves, not less. The union enhances rather than diminishes individual identity, creating a paradox where togetherness increases separateness and intimacy strengthens independence. This paradox is too complex for the linear mind to grasp, too mysterious for the controlling ego to manage. It requires a different kind of knowing, a willingness to trust in processes that cannot be understood, only experienced. Most people are not yet ready for such trust, such surrender to the unknown. Sometimes the fear of the inner marriage is actually the fear of one's own power. Deep love activates not just vulnerability, but also tremendous creative and transformative energy. To fully love and be loved awakens capacities within us that we may not even know we possess. The ability to heal and be healed, to create and be created anew, to touch and be touched by the divine itself. Many people are more afraid of their own magnificence than of their own inadequacy. To step into the full power of love would require them to release their stories of limitation, their excuses for mediocrity, their comfortable identification with being less than they truly are. You represent not just love, but the full flowering of human potential that love makes possible. In your presence, they glimpse what life could be like if they were willing to risk everything for the sake of authentic connection. The vision is so beautiful and so far from their current reality that it seems impossible, and rather than reach for the impossible, they choose to look away. The fear of the inner marriage is ultimately the fear of transformation itself, the terror of becoming someone they have never been, of living a life they have never imagined, of touching depths of experience they have only dreamed of. It is easier to remain safely separate than to risk the ecstasy and agony of true union. Your role in this sacred dance is not to convince anyone to overcome their fear or to enter the crucible before they are ready. Your role is to continue embodying the possibility of sacred union, to remain open to the conjunctio while holding space for those who are not yet prepared for its transformative fire. You carry within your presence the power to awaken these sleeping archetypes in others. This is not something you do consciously or deliberately. It is simply the natural resonance between souls, the way certain frequencies of being can activate dormant potentials in the human psyche. Your very existence becomes a tuning fork that causes similar notes to vibrate in the depths of those you encounter. When someone meets you and feels an inexplicable pull, a mysterious attraction that seems to come from somewhere deeper than personal preference or social conditioning, they are feeling the stirring of an archetype within themselves. You have become, in that moment, a mirror reflecting back to them an aspect of their own soul that has been sleeping, waiting, longing to be born. Perhaps you embody the lover archetype, not in the narrow sense of romantic love, but in the broader sense of one who approaches life with open heart, who sees beauty everywhere, who connects deeply and without reservation. When someone encounters this energy in you, it awakens their own capacity for love, their own hunger for connection, their own desire to move through the world with an open heart. But awakening an archetype is not always welcome. Many people have spent years building their lives around the absence of these energies, organizing their existence to avoid the very qualities that would make them whole. The person who has chosen safety over passion, predictability over love, control over surrender, has constructed their entire identity around not being the lover. When you appear in their world carrying this archetypal energy, you threaten not just their choices, but their entire sense of self. Or maybe you awaken the rebel in them, the part that refuses to accept what is simply because it has always been that way, the energy that questions authority and challenges the status quo. Your presence reminds them that conformity is a choice, that the rules they have followed so obediently are not laws of nature, but human constructions that can be challenged, changed, or abandoned entirely. For someone who has built their security around being good, being acceptable, being what others expect them to be, the awakening of the rebel archetype feels like psychological earthquake. It threatens to topple the carefully constructed edifice of their compliant life. So they turn away from you, not because they don't feel the pull of rebellion, but because they feel it too strongly, and it terrifies them. Sometimes you stir the orphan archetype, that wounded child energy that knows what it means to be abandoned, rejected, left to fend for itself in a world that doesn't always care. This archetype carries both the pain of abandonment and the strength that comes from learning to survive alone. When others recognize this energy in you, it awakens their own orphan wounds, their own experiences of being left behind, overlooked, forgotten. But the orphan archetype also carries tremendous power, the power of those who have learned to rely on themselves, who have developed inner resources because outer support was not available, who carry a fierce independence born from necessity. Many people are not ready for this kind of strength, not prepared for the self-reliance it requires, not willing to face the wounds that give birth to such resilience. The archetypal awakening creates what Jung called numinous experience, moments of contact with something larger than the personal ego, encounters with energies that feel both deeply familiar and utterly mysterious. When someone meets you and feels this numinous quality in your presence, they are encountering not just you as an individual, but the archetypal energy you carry, the universal pattern you embody. This can be overwhelming for those who have lived, primarily in the realm of the personal ego, who have organized their lives around concrete concerns and practical matters. The archetypal realm operates by different rules. It is mythic rather than literal, symbolic rather than concrete, eternal rather than temporal. To enter this realm requires a kind of psychological courage that not everyone possesses. The person who feels drawn to you but then withdraws is experiencing what Jung called the transcendent function, the tension between opposites that occurs. When an archetypal energy begins to constellate in the psyche, part of them recognizes the truth and power of what you represent, while another part resists the transformation that embracing this archetype would require. They find themselves caught between two worlds, the familiar world of their constructed identity and the mysterious world of archetypal possibility. You represent the bridge between these worlds, the invitation to step from who they have been into who they might become. But crossing such bridges requires a kind of death, the death of the old self, the familiar patterns, the safe limitations they have accepted as their reality. Most people are not ready for such deaths, even when they lead to rebirth. The ego clings to what it knows, preferring the familiar prison to the unknown freedom. So they retreat from you, not because they don't want what you offer, but because they are not prepared for the price that receiving it would require. This creates a peculiar dynamic in your relationships. People are drawn to you by forces they don't understand, only to pull back when they sense the transformative implications of that attraction. They want the energy you carry, but not the change it would bring, the gift, but not the responsibility, the awakening, but not the work. You become like a sacred flame that people approach for warmth, only to retreat when they realize that coming too close would require them to burn away aspects of themselves they are not ready to release. They hover at the edges of your light, drawn by its beauty but afraid of its power to illuminate what they would rather keep hidden. The archetypal mirror you hold reflects not just what people could become, but what they would have to release in order to become it. The person who is called to embody the lover must release their attachment to emotional safety. The one called to embrace the rebel must let go of their need for approval. The individual invited to claim their sage nature must surrender their certainty about what they think they know. These releases feel like deaths because, in a psychological sense, they are deaths. The old self must die for the new self to be born. This is the fundamental pattern of individuation that Jung saw as the central task of human development, the ongoing process of dying to who we have been in order to become who we truly are. But death, even psychological death, is frightening. It requires faith in something that cannot be proven, trust in a process that cannot be controlled, willingness to let go of the known for the sake of the unknown. Most people prefer the safety of their limitations to the risk of their possibilities. You carry the invitation to this kind of transformation simply by being yourself. You embody archetypal energies in their integrated form, showing others what it looks like when these universal patterns are lived consciously, embraced fully, expressed authentically. You are a living example of what becomes possible when we stop resisting the archetypal calls within our own souls. Some people will receive this invitation and find the courage to answer it. They will use their attraction to you as a doorway into their own transformation, recognizing that what they see in you is actually a reflection of their own unlived potential. These souls will do the difficult work of releasing who they have been in order to become who they are meant to be. Others will retreat from the invitation, choosing the familiar over the transformative, the safe over the sacred, the known over the possible. This is not failure, it is simply timing. The archetypal energies are patient. They will wait until the soul is ready, until the circumstances are right, until the call can be answered without destroying what is not yet ready to die. Your role as an archetypal mirror is not to force awakening, but to remain available for it. You hold space for transformation without demanding it, embody possibility without insisting on it, carry the invitation without requiring acceptance. You trust that those who are meant to answer the archetypal call will recognize it when they are ready, and those who are not will move away to protect what still needs protecting within themselves. The archetypes are always working toward wholeness, always calling us home to our true nature, always inviting us to become fully human rather than partially alive. You serve as an agent of this universal process, a messenger of the deeper self, a bridge between what is and what could be. In the spaces where others withdraw from you, know that you have touched something sacred in them, awakened something eternal, offered something that their soul recognizes, even if their ego rejects. The very fact of their retreat is testimony to the power of what you carry, the truth of what you represent, the reality of the transformation you offer simply by being yourself in a world that has forgotten what authentic selfhood looks like. In the ancient art of alchemy, there was a sacred process called the conjunctio, the mystical marriage of opposites, the union of elements that appeared fundamentally incompatible yet somehow belonged together. The alchemist knew that this union could not be forced or manipulated. It required the perfect conditions, the right timing, and above all, the willingness of the elements themselves to surrender their separate identities in service of something greater. This is not a conscious process. They are not deliberately choosing to see their disowned qualities in you. The shadow operates below the threshold of awareness, in the murky depths where the ego's light cannot penetrate. It works through what Jung called projection, the unconscious mechanism by which we see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. Perhaps you embody the spontaneity they have learned to suppress. In your unguarded laughter, your willingness to be moved by beauty, your capacity for wonder, they recognize the childlike joy they were taught to outgrow. Their shadow holds this lost spontaneity, and seeing it reflected in you creates an uncomfortable resonance, a reminder of what they sacrificed when they chose dignity over delight, control over chaos, respectability over raw aliveness. Or maybe you represent the anger they have never allowed themselves to feel, in your willingness to speak truth, to set boundaries, to refuse what doesn't serve you. They see the fierce protector they learned to silence long ago. Their shadow contains all the no's they swallowed, all the boundaries they failed to set, all the rage they turned inward rather than risk disapproval. Your presence activates this disowned anger, but instead of reclaiming it, they project it onto you, seeing you as aggressive, difficult, too much, when what they're really seeing is their own unlived fierceness. Sometimes what you trigger in them is even more primal, the raw, unashamed sexuality that civilization taught them to hide, the primitive hunger for connection that sophisticated society deemed unseemly. In your comfort with your own body, your ease with physical affection, your unapologetic sensuality, they encounter the erotic energy they have learned to fear and suppress. Their shadow holds this sexual vitality, and your embodiment of it creates such discomfort that they must look away, create distance, pretend you don't exist, rather than feel the stirring of their own denied desires. Or perhaps it is your vulnerability that threatens them, your willingness to be seen in your imperfection, your comfort with uncertainty, your acceptance of your own limitations. Their shadow contains all the weakness they have refused to acknowledge, all the fear they have learned to hide, all the need they have convinced themselves they don't have. You become a mirror, reflecting back their own carefully hidden fragility, and the sight is too threatening to bear. The projection works both ways. Not only do you become a screen for their disowned qualities, but you also carry the energy of what they most need to integrate. You are simultaneously what they fear and what they long for, what they reject and what they secretly crave. This creates a complex psychological dynamic where they are drawn to you and repelled by you at the same time, fascinated and frightened, attracted and avoidant. Jung understood that we are most disturbed by qualities in others that we possess, but refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The person who is most judgmental about anger is often sitting on a volcano of their own rage. The one who is most critical of neediness is usually desperate for connection, but terrified to admit it. The individual who reacts most strongly to others' sexuality is frequently struggling with their own disowned, erotic nature. This is why your presence can be so unsettling to others. You're not just a person. You are a walking invitation to wholeness, a living reminder of the energies they have cast into shadow. You represent the possibility of integration, of reclaiming what was lost, of becoming whole rather than merely acceptable. But integration requires courage, and most people are not ready for such courage. It is easier to project the shadow onto others than to reclaim it. Easier to judge what we see in you than to acknowledge what we deny in ourselves. Easier to maintain the illusion of our one-sided goodness than to embrace the full spectrum of our humanity. The shadow projection creates a particularly painful form of isolation for those who serve as screens. You find yourself carrying qualities that don't belong to you, receiving reactions that have nothing to do with your actual behavior. Being seen as things you are not, while your true self remains invisible. It is like being haunted by ghosts that belong to other people's psyches. You might be labeled as angry when you are actually quite peaceful, seen as needy when you are remarkably self-sufficient, perceived as sexual when you are simply comfortable in your own skin. These projections can be so persistent and powerful that you begin to doubt your own reality, to wonder if perhaps you really are what others seem to see in you. But here is what Jung knew that most do not: the fact that you serve as a projection. Screen for others' shadows is not a sign of your inadequacy. It is a sign of your psychological permeability, your capacity to hold space for what others cannot hold themselves. You have become, whether by choice or by nature, a container for the collective shadow, a repository for the unlived life of those around you. This is both a burden and a gift. The burden is obvious. You carry the weight of others' disowned aspects, receive the projections of their unlived life, bear the brunt of their unconscious material. You become the scapegoat for qualities that exist in everyone, but are only acknowledged in you. But the gift is profound. You have access to the full spectrum of human experience in a way that those who have cast their shadows onto you do not. You carry the wildness they have tamed, the passion they have controlled, the authenticity they have sanitized. You hold energies that make you fully human, while they remain fractional, divided, incomplete. The shadow projection also serves a collective function. By carrying what others cannot carry, you help maintain the psychological balance of the group. You become the designated holder of qualities that are necessary for the wholeness of the collective, but too threatening for individuals to own. In ancient times, this role was recognized and honored. The shaman, the artist, the holy fool, the sacred prostitute, all served as containers for collective shadow material. In our modern world, this function is no longer understood or appreciated. Instead of being honored as shadow carriers, those who serve this function are often marginalized, criticized, or ostracized. Society needs its shadow carriers but cannot acknowledge them, depends on them but cannot validate them, requires their service but cannot reward them. The key to surviving as a projection screen is understanding that what others see in you says more about them than it does about you. Their reactions are information about their own psyche, their own unlived life, their own journey toward wholeness. You are not responsible for integrating their shadow. That is work they must do themselves, in their own time, in their own way. Your responsibility is to remain clear about who you actually are beneath the projections, to resist taking on qualities that don't belong to you, to maintain your own psychological boundaries even when others are unconsciously asking you to carry their disowned material. Some people will eventually withdraw their projections, recognize their own shadow, and begin the work of integration. When this happens, their relationship with you will shift dramatically. They will see you more clearly, react to you more appropriately, relate to you as a separate person rather than as a screen for their own unconscious contents. Others will maintain their projections indefinitely, preferring the familiar pattern of seeing their disowned qualities in you rather than doing the difficult work of reclaiming them. This is not personal. It is simply where they are in their own journey of becoming. Your role is not to force others to see you clearly or to withdraw their projections. Your role is to continue being authentic in a world full of shadow play, to remain whole in relationships with fractional people, to embody the integration that others fear while holding space for their eventual awakening to their own completeness. The shadow will always seek recognition, always push toward consciousness, always work to restore the balance that was lost when parts of the self were cast into darkness. You are part of this larger healing process, serving as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious, the acceptable and the denied, the lived and the unlived life. In the end, those who project their shadow onto you are your teachers, as much as you are theirs. They show you which energies you carry that others fear, which qualities you embody that the world needs, which aspects of humanity you represent. that require protection and honoring in a culture that has forgotten how to be whole. Deep in the collective unconscious, older than memory and more powerful than reason, live the archetypes, primordial patterns of being that have shaped human experience since consciousness first awakened in our species. These are not mere concepts or metaphors, but living energies that pulse through the depths of every human psyche, waiting for the right moment, the right circumstance, the right invitation to emerge into the light of conscious experience. Jung discovered that these archetypal energies exist as potentials within every soul. The lover who yearns for union, the warrior who fights for what matters, the sage who seeks truth, the innocent who trusts in goodness, the rebel who challenges what is in service of what could be. They live in us like seeds waiting for the proper season, like flames waiting for the right wind to fan them into life. You have encountered these over-identified personas countless times, though you may not have recognized them as such. They are the people who seem perpetually composed, whose emotional responses feel calculated rather than spontaneous, who maintain a careful distance even in moments that call for intimacy. They are not cold by nature. Often, they are the most sensitive souls, the ones who learned early that their authentic feelings were too much, too raw, too dangerous for the world to handle. When such a person encounters you, you who move through life with less armor, who seem comfortable with the messy reality of being human, something profound happens in the depths of their psyche. Your presence becomes a kind of solvent, threatening to dissolve the carefully maintained boundaries between their public face and their private truth. The persona recognizes that your authenticity poses a threat to its carefully constructed performance. This is why they look through you rather than at you, why their attention seems to slide away from your presence like oil on water. It is not that they don't see you. In fact, they see you too clearly. They recognize in your unguarded presence something that their persona has worked years to suppress. The possibility of being real, of dropping the performance, of allowing their authentic self to be witnessed by another human being. The persona's mask of detachment is not cruelty, it is terror. Terror of being seen beneath the role, terror of the intimacy that your presence seems to invite, terror of the vulnerability that would be required to meet you authentically. Their mask has become so much a part of their identity that they genuinely fear what would happen if it were removed. Who would they be without their careful composure? What would remain if the performance ended? This fear is not irrational. For many, the persona developed as a survival strategy, a way of managing situations where their authentic self was met with rejection, criticism, or abandonment. The child who was told to stop being so emotional learned to wear the mask of calm reasonableness. The one who was criticized for being too much developed the persona of careful restraint. The person who was punished for expressing needs learned to wear the mask of self-sufficiency. These personas served them well in their original contexts. They provided safety, acceptance, a way of moving through a world that seemed unwelcoming to their authentic nature. But now, years later, the mask has become fused with their sense of self. They have worn it so long that they have forgotten their own face beneath it. When you appear in their world with your particular brand of realness, you create what Jung called a collision of opposites. Your authenticity confronts their performance. Your vulnerability challenges their invulnerability. Your willingness to be seen threatens their commitment to remaining hidden. This collision generates tremendous psychic energy, but instead of using that energy for growth and integration, the over-identified persona uses it to strengthen its defenses. The detachment you experience from them is actually a form of psychic self-preservation. To truly see you would require them to acknowledge what they have sacrificed for the sake of social acceptance. To receive your authenticity would demand that they risk their own To meet you in the space of genuine human connection would threaten the very foundation of the identity they have constructed. So they look past you, speak around you, relate to you as if you were a character in their well-rehearsed play, rather than a living, breathing human being with depths and complexities that might disrupt their careful script. They respond to their idea of you rather than to your actual presence, because your actual presence is too alive, too real, too threatening, to the delicate balance they have achieved. This creates a peculiar form of invisibility for those who move through the world with less armor. You find yourself in conversations that feel hollow, relationships that seem scripted, encounters that lack the genuine warmth of human recognition. It is as if you are speaking a different language, the language of the heart, while everyone else is reciting lines from a play you never auditioned for. The tragedy is that beneath every rigid persona lives a soul longing for the very connection that your presence offers. The person who maintains such careful emotional distance is often the one who most deeply craves intimacy. The one who seems so controlled and composed may be the very person whose inner life is richest, most complex, most in need of witness and understanding, but the persona has become their protector, their guardian at the gate of their authentic self. It screens all incoming experiences, filtering out anything that might threaten the carefully maintained equilibrium. Your realness registers as a potential threat to this system, so the persona activates its primary defense, emotional withdrawal. The pretense of not seeing, the mask of indifference. What you are witnessing in these moments is not personal rejection, but psychological protection. The persona is doing its job, protecting the vulnerable self from what it perceives as danger. The fact that the danger is actually the possibility of love, of connection, of being truly seen and accepted, makes the situation both tragic and profoundly human. Jung understood that the goal is not to destroy the persona. It serves important functions and will always be necessary for social functioning. The goal is integration, finding a way for the persona to serve the authentic self rather than replacing it. This requires what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites until a new, more integrated way of being emerges. For those trapped behind rigid personas, your presence offers both threat and invitation. You threaten their carefully constructed safety, but you also invite them toward the wholeness they have sacrificed. You are simultaneously the problem and the solution, the danger and the salvation, the question and the answer they have been avoiding. Most will choose the safety of their mask over the risk of authentic connection. This is not weakness, it is simply where they are in their journey of becoming. The persona serves them until it doesn't, protects them until it imprisons them, helps them until it hinders them. The timing of when someone is ready to risk the vulnerability of authentic relationship cannot be forced or manipulated. It emerges from the depths of their own soul's readiness. But for those few who are prepared to let their mask become more transparent, who have grown tired of the performance and hungry for genuine connection, your presence becomes a doorway. You offer them, simply by being yourself, permission to experiment with authenticity, to risk being real, to discover what lies beneath the layers of protection they have constructed. The persona's mask of detachment is not your enemy, though. It may feel like one when you encounter it repeatedly in your relationships. It is simply another wounded aspect of the human psyche, doing its best to protect something precious and vulnerable from a world that has not always been safe for authentic expression. Your role is not to tear away others' masks. Such violence would only cause them to create stronger defenses. Your role is to continue being real in a world full of performances, to remain authentic in spaces that reward pretense, to embody the possibility of genuine human connection even when others cannot yet receive it. Some will see your authenticity and remember their own. Some will witness your vulnerability and find the courage to risk their own. Some will encounter your realness and begin the slow, sacred work of removing the layers that have kept them safe, but also kept them separate. From the life they truly long to live, the mask will always be there, but it need not be permanent. The persona can learn to serve rather than dominate, to protect rather than imprison, to facilitate rather than prevent the genuine encounters that make life worth living. And in those moments when someone allows their mask to slip, when they risk meeting you authentically, when they choose connection over protection, in those moments something sacred is born in the space between souls, something that makes all the previous rejection worth enduring. In the depths of every human psyche lives a figure that Jung called the shadow, not evil in its essence, but hidden, denied, cast into the basement of consciousness like an unwanted relative locked in the attic. The shadow is everything we have decided we are not, everything we have deemed unacceptable about ourselves, every impulse we have learned to suppress, every truth we have agreed not to speak, every aspect of our humanity we have sacrificed on. The altar of social acceptance. The shadow is not our enemy, though we treat it as such. It is the repository of our unlived life, the keeper of our abandoned potentials, the guardian of energies we have been taught to fear. It holds our raw sexuality, our uncensored anger, our primitive needs, our wild creativity, our spontaneous joy, all the aspects of being human that civilized society has deemed too dangerous, too messy, too unpredictable for polite company. When someone looks at you and turns away, when they seem to see right through you as if you were made of glass, when they respond to your presence with inexplicable coldness or avoidance, you are often witnessing the shadow projection in action. You have become, in that moment, a living screen onto which they are unconsciously projecting the very aspects of themselves they cannot bear to acknowledge. The wound that watches you is ancient, older than memory, deeper than thought. It was born in the first moment they learned that parts of themselves were unacceptable, unwelcome, unsafe to reveal. It grew in the silence that followed their first authentic expression of need, in the turning away that greeted their earliest attempts at vulnerability, in the cold space where love should have been, but wasn't. Every human being carries this wound, the wound of the unloved self. It is the part of us that was met with indifference when it needed attention, with criticism when it needed acceptance, with abandonment when it needed presence. This wounded aspect of the self learns early to hide, to compress itself into smaller and smaller spaces, until it becomes a kind of phantom limb of the psyche, still aching, still reaching, but invisible to the conscious mind. Jung understood this phenomenon in his work with what he called the inner child, though he saw it through the broader lens of the wounded aspects of the psyche that remain split off from our conscious awareness. These fragments of unloved self don't disappear. They retreat into the shadow, where they continue to influence our behavior, our relationships, our capacity to receive and give love. When someone looks at you and then looks away, when they seem unable to hold space for your presence, they are responding not to who you are, but to who you remind them of. You have become, in that moment, an unwitting mirror reflecting back to them the very aspects of themselves they have worked so hard to forget, to deny, to keep hidden from the world and from their own awareness. Perhaps it is the openness in your eyes that triggers their wound, the way you seem to see and be seen without the elaborate defenses they have constructed. Their wounded self recognizes something familiar in your unguarded presence, something that whispers of a time when they too moved through the world with such transparency. The recognition is too painful, so they avert their gaze, protecting themselves from the memory of their own lost innocence. Or maybe it is your willingness to be imperfect that disturbs them, your comfort with your own flaws and contradictions. Their wounded self learned long ago that acceptance was conditional, that love had to be earned through performance, that being human was somehow not enough. You in your unashamed humanity become a reminder of what they sacrificed when they chose perfection over authenticity, control over vulnerability, safety over truth. This is the paradox of the wounded healer. You carry not only your own healing, but somehow become a repository for others' unhealed pain. Like Chiron in Greek mythology, the centaur who was wounded by an arrow dipped in the Hydra's poison, you find yourself bearing a wound that cannot be fully healed, a pain that serves not as personal suffering, but as a source of wisdom and compassion. For others, Chiron's wound was incurable, yet it made him the greatest healer among the gods and mortals. He learned the deepest secrets of healing not through academic study, but through intimate knowledge of pain, through living daily with the ache that would not subside. His wound became his gift, his limitation became his strength, his suffering became his service. You walk through the world like Chiron, carrying within your very presence the echo of wounds, both yours and others. When people encounter you, they feel the stirring of their own unhealed places, the movement of pain they have worked so hard to keep still. Their response is often to retreat, to create distance, to pretend they don't see you, rather than face what you unconsciously reflect back to them. This is not a conscious process. They are not deliberately choosing to hurt you or dismiss you. They are responding from the deepest levels of their psyche, from the primal survival mechanisms that learned long ago that certain feelings, certain truths, certain aspects of their own humanity were dangerous to acknowledge. The child who was told not to cry learns to fear tears in others. The one who was punished for anger becomes uncomfortable around anyone who expresses authentic frustration. The person who was abandoned for being needy develops an aversion to neediness in all its forms. They carry these wounds like invisible shields, protecting them from re-experiencing the original pain, but also preventing them from fully connecting with others. When you appear in their world with your particular combination of vulnerability and strength, authenticity and depth, you inadvertently become a trigger for these ancient defense systems. Your presence says to their wounded self, here is someone who embodies what you were told was unacceptable. Here is someone who seems to have found a way to be human without apology. The reaction is swift and often unconscious. They must look away, create distance, dismiss or diminish you in order to maintain the careful equilibrium they have constructed around their wound. To truly see you would be to risk seeing themselves, and they are not yet ready for such recognition. This creates a peculiar form of loneliness for those who serve as mirrors for others' wounds. You find yourself surrounded by people who cannot quite look at you directly, who seem to see you but not receive you, who acknowledge your presence while somehow remaining absent from the encounter. It is like being a ghost in reverse. You are the one who is alive and real, while they are the ones who have disappeared into the safety of their defenses. But here is what Jung knew, what the ancient wisdom traditions understood, what every wounded healer eventually discovers. This apparent rejection is not really about you at all. It is a sacred response to the medicine you carry, the healing you offer simply by being yourself. The very qualities that make others uncomfortable, your authenticity, your vulnerability, your refusal to hide your humanity. These are the gifts the world needs most desperately. The wound that watches you is also the wound that can be healed through you, not by your effort or intention, but by your simple presence, your willingness to remain open even when others close, to stay soft even when the world demands hardness, to continue being real even when reality seems to make everyone else uncomfortable. Some people will never be ready for such healing. They will continue to look away, to create distance, to protect themselves from the mirror you hold. This is not your failure or theirs. It is simply where they are in their own journey of becoming. The soul has its own timing, its own seasons of readiness, its own moments of grace. But for those who are prepared, who have grown tired of carrying their wounds in isolation, who sense that healing might be possible even if they don't know how, for these souls, your presence becomes a doorway. You offer them, without trying, a living example of what it looks like to be wounded and still whole, broken and still beautiful, human and still worthy of love. The wound that watches you is not your burden to carry alone. It belongs to the collective, human experience, to the shared heritage of pain and possibility that connects all souls. You have simply become conscious of it, willing to feel it, brave enough to let it live in you without trying to fix it or make it go away. This is the deepest service of the wounded healer, not to cure others' pain, but to demonstrate that pain can be held with grace, that wounds can become sources of wisdom, that the very things that make us most human are also what make us most divine. In every moment of being unseen, unacknowledged, looked past or looked through, remember this: you are not being rejected. You are being recognized at such a deep level that the recognition terrifies. The wound that watches you is also the wound that loves you, that sees in you the possibility of its own healing, its own integration, its own return to wholeness. Walk gently with this knowledge. Carry your role as mirror with both humility and strength. Know that every person who looks away from you is also, in their deepest heart, looking for you, looking for the permission you represent, the healing you embody, the wholeness you carry, like a torch in the darkness of their forgotten selves. In the theater of human interaction, we are all actors wearing carefully crafted masks. These masks are not deceptions in the crude sense. They are psychological necessities, protective layers that allow us to navigate the complex choreography of social existence. Jung called this mask the persona, from the Latin word meaning to sound through, like the masks worn by actors in ancient Greek theater that amplified their voices while concealing their true faces. The persona is not inherently false, though it can become a prison. It is the face we show the world, the role we play in the grand drama of collective life. It is the professional demeanor we adopt at work, the social smile we wear at parties, the composed expression we maintain in times of crisis. The persona serves us well. It smooths the rough edges of human interaction, provides structure for social roles, and offers a kind of psychological clothing that protects our more vulnerable inner selves from constant exposure. But like all psychological functions, the persona can become overdeveloped, rigid, so identified with our sense of self that we forget there is a living, breathing human being beneath the mask. When this happens, the persona transforms from a useful tool into a suffocating cage, from a protective layer into a barrier that keeps authentic connection at bay. Carl Jung explained, "Why they ignore you. Even though they want you, there is a silence that lives behind the eyes of those who look away. It is not the silence of peace, nor the quiet of contemplation, but the heavy silence of the unspoken words that have been swallowed, truths that have been buried, feelings that have been pressed down into the dark soil of the unconscious until they take root there, growing in shadow." You have felt it, haven't you? That moment when someone's gaze meets yours and then slides away, as if your very presence has become a mirror they cannot bear to look into. Their eyes dart to the floor, to their phone, to anything but the reflection of themselves that somehow lives in your face. And in that turning away, you taste the bitter salt of what feels like rejection, like dismissal, like proof that you are somehow too much or not enough, never quite right for the world that seems to flow around you like water around a stone. But what if I told you that this turning away has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them? What if I told you that your presence, your very being in the world, acts as an unwitting catalyst, stirring something in their depths that they have spent years learning not to feel. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, that part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the aspects of our being that we have deemed unacceptable, inappropriate, or simply too painful to integrate. The shadow is not evil, though it may contain what we call darkness. It is simply the unlived life, the unfelt feeling, the unspoken truth that we have banished to the basement of our being. And there it waits, patient as stone, growing stronger. In the darkness of our denial, when someone looks at you and then looks away, when they seem to see right through you or past you, as if you were made of glass, you are witnessing the shadow in action. You are seeing someone flee from a part of themselves that your presence has awakened. For the shadow is like a sleeping dragon, and certain people, certain energies, certain ways of being in the world have the power to stir it from its slumber. Perhaps it is your authenticity that frightens them, the way you move through the world. Without the carefully constructed mask that they have worn for so long, they have forgotten their own face beneath it. Jung called this mask the persona, the character we play in the great theater of social life. The persona is necessary, a kind of psychological clothing that helps us navigate the world. But when the persona becomes our only identity, when we lose touch with the authentic self that lives beneath the role, we begin to fear anyone who seems to move through life without such elaborate defenses. Your unguarded presence becomes a reminder of what they have lost, of the spontaneity and genuineness they sacrificed long ago on the altar of social acceptance. They see in you the child they once were, before the world taught them to hide their true feelings, before they learned that certain emotions were dangerous, certain truths unwelcome, certain parts of themselves unacceptable. Or perhaps it is your vulnerability that disturbs them, the way you seem to carry your heart slightly outside your chest, visible to anyone who cares to look. They have spent years building walls around their own heart, constructing elaborate fortresses of cynicism and indifference to protect themselves from the inevitable wounds that come with being human. Your openness feels like an accusation, a living reminder of the softness they have hardened, the trust they have withdrawn, the hope they have buried. They turn away because looking at you is like looking at a photograph of themselves from long ago, when they still believed in love without conditions, in friendship without strategy, in a world that might actually be safe enough for them to be real. The ache of that recognition is sometimes too much to bear, so they avert their eyes and pretend you are not there, pretend that what you represent is not still alive somewhere in the depths of their own being. Sometimes what you awaken in them is even deeper than nostalgia for lost innocence. Sometimes you stir the very dreams they abandoned, the paths they chose not to take, the versions of themselves they decided were too risky, too impractical, too vulnerable to the world's harsh judgment. You become a walking embodiment of the road not taken, and Robert Frost was right. That makes all the difference, though not in the way we might expect. The road not taken lives in us like a ghost, haunting the edges of our carefully constructed lives. It whispers of possibilities we closed off, of selves we refused to become, of chances we were too afraid to take. And when someone else seems to be walking that abandoned path, when their very existence suggests that the thing we thought impossible might actually be possible, the grief of our own choices becomes unbearable. So they turn away from you because you are a reminder that they chose safety over authenticity, acceptance over truth, the known over the mysterious. You are living proof that another way of being is possible, and that knowledge threatens the very foundation of the compromise they made with themselves long ago. This is the profound loneliness of the one who awakens shadows. You become a trigger for everyone else's unlived life, a mirror for their abandoned dreams, a reminder of the selves they left behind. And in this role, You often find yourself walking through the world like a ghost, seen but not recognized, present but not acknowledged, real but somehow not quite legitimate in the eyes of those who have forgotten how to see. But here is what Jung understood that most do not: this ability to awaken the shadow in others, to stir their sleeping depths, to remind them of their unlived lives. This is not a curse, though it may feel like one. It is a gift, though it comes wrapped in the painful paper of isolation and misunderstanding. You are serving as what Jung called a psychopomp, a guide between worlds, a figure who helps others navigate the territory between consciousness and the unconscious, between the life they are living and the life that wants to live through them. The very discomfort they feel in your presence is the beginning of their awakening, the first stirring of something in them that has been asleep too long. Of course, most people are not ready for such awakening. Most would rather remain in the comfortable numbness of their persona, the familiar prison of their unlived life. They will choose the devil they know over the angel they don't, the pain they understand over the transformation they fear. This is not their failing. It is simply the natural human resistance to change, to growth, to the death and rebirth that true transformation requires. But for those rare souls who are ready, who have grown tired of their own costume, who feel the stirring of something authentic beneath the layers of social conditioning, for these people, your presence becomes a doorway. You offer them, simply by being yourself, permission to remember who they were before the world told them who they should be. This is why the mystics and the poets, the artists and the rebels, the sensitive souls and the truth-tellers have always walked a lonely path. They carry within themselves the reminder of what it means to be fully human, and most people are not ready for such fullness. Most are still learning to be partial, still perfecting the art of living at half capacity, still convinced that safety lies in staying small. But you who feel the weight of others turning away, you who know the ache of being seen and then unseen, you who carry the loneliness of the one who awakens shadows, you are here for a reason. You are the reminder that another way of being is possible. You are the living proof that the authentic self, however uncomfortable it may make others, is worth the price of their discomfort. In the great economy of the soul, every rejection you experience, every turned-away glance, every moment of being overlooked or dismissed is actually a sign that you are doing something right. You are being real in a world that has forgotten how to value reality over image, truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance. The silence behind their eyes is not your silence to fill. It is theirs to face, in their own time, in their own way. Your job is not to make them comfortable with your presence, but to remain present to yourself, to continue being the authentic soul you are, regardless of whether others can bear to look. For in the end, those who are meant to see you will see you. Those who are ready for the awakening you offer will find their way to you. And those who turn away, they are simply not yet ready for the mirror you hold, the reminder you carry, the invitation you extend simply by being yourself in a world that has forgotten what that means. There is a wound that lives in the space between souls, a silent ache that passes from one heart to another without words, without acknowledgement, without even conscious recognition. It moves through the world like a ghost seeking recognition, finding its way into every relationship, every encounter, every moment when two people stand before each other in the naked vulnerability of simply being human. You have felt this wound, though you may not have recognized it as such. It arrives in the moment when someone looks right through you, when their eyes seem to focus on a point just beyond your shoulder, when their attention slides away from you like water off glass. In that instant, you taste something bitter and familiar, the sharp edge of rejection, the cold blade of dismissal. But what you are tasting is not your own wound. It is theirs.